Today, joining us is Tom Wheeler, who is a retired CEO from Cleveland Utilities. He was with them for 43 years, and I don't know if we'll be able to get all the history that he can bestow upon us in the time allotted, but we're going to try to cover it all. Whether it's your box or somebody else's.
Well, I know when you invited me and I kind of looked back on what you've been doing, I was really amazed at what you've put together over the last 2 or 3 years with these interviews. I've started going back and listening to them, and it'll take me a while to catch up.
We've got 104, what's he, 146 or 139? 139 videos.
Wow.
Of mostly local people.
Mm-hmm.
And wouldn't you love to have some of those old people like Dee Frisbee or some of those older people? Wouldn't that be something to see?
Mayor Death Row.
Mayor Death Row.
Yep, sure would.
Bobby Taylor.
Bobby Taylor. Yep.
And even the old people
right down
from Cleveland Utilities.
Harold Allman.
Harold Allman. I remember him. He used to dress up, didn't he?
Oh, he was always dressed up. Never saw him without a suit and tie.
You know, I think he had an office downtown towards the end of his career.
And it was in the Monument Building.
And he didn't do anything. He just went in there, went to the post office.
Read the newspaper. I visited him a few times in there. I'd go in the Monument Building usually on a weekend, get a haircut. And his office was there, and I'd usually walk in there and chat with him for 20 or 30 minutes. And yeah.
That was really unique. You know, he stayed active, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
He'd walk down to the post office.
Yep.
What was his main career?
He was at Hardwick Stove. At the time I knew him, he was the manager, the chief, the CEO. And he being with Cleveland Utilities, I worked with him on several things that were going on over there, and he was always a gentleman. I first met him when I was in my early mid-20s when I came to Cleveland. My boss sent me over there. They had a project going on dealing with electricity, and I had a meeting with Mr. Allman, and I went in his office. I'll be honest with you, I was scared, going in his office, 25 years old. And I walked in there, and he was very, very kind to me. He knew I was a little nervous, but I'll never forget, I sat at his desk. He had a chair in front of had this huge desk that he sat behind, and I sat in the chair, and when I sat in it, I sank down to where my chin was like on his table. Yeah. So I was looking up at him in total awe.
You know, they said David Letterman did that. He always had his chair sitting higher than his guests.
Yeah. Well, that's the way it was in Mr. Allman's office.
Where was you from originally?
I'm from North Alabama. I grew up on Sand Mountain. Boaz, Albertville, Gunnersville, that area, Marshall County. Now,
some people say that's a Bamaval, or is that what they call people that are real close to all 3 states? You ever heard that saying?
I've heard it, yeah. I've heard that.
So Boaz.
That was the outlet capital for a while. A lot of people from Cleveland would go down there during I guess it was the 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, Boaz Outlet. Yeah. I think I even went there one time.
I think most everybody did at one time.
So that's where you were.
I grew up there, went to high school there. We lived for a few years in Fort Payne. And I think when I was 6, we moved to Sand Mountain.
Now, were you in the electrical trades, or how did that
manage? I got out of school. I went to Vanderbilt for a couple of years, transferred to Auburn, and finished in electrical engineering. And when I got out of Auburn, I went to West Palm Beach, Florida, to work with Pratt Whitney Aircraft. I worked with them for a couple of years before finding out about a job opening here in Cleveland. I wanted to get back into my dad was in the electrical utility business. Oh. And I didn't think I'd ever do that, but I did it for 43 years. Yeah. So yeah, I'd heard about a job opening here, and I came up and interviewed and took a job, moved to Cleveland in, I think it was 1971. And I told you this earlier, walked into work at Cleveland Utilities, and the first person I met, well, the fourth or fifth person I met was your dad.
Is that right?
He was working there in the accounting department.
He would have had to have been, well, I was 6. So he would have been 25 or 26.
I was 24, 25. We were the same age. Yeah. We are the same age. And yeah, he was one of the first persons I met. Worked with him for a few years, and then he left.
I never knew why he quit there. I guess he went to the Farm Bureau or somewhere. I'm not sure.
I think he went to Farm Bureau. Yeah, and he was there for a long time.
Till he retired.
Yeah. So yeah, we had and I still bump into him from time to time, and always enjoy talking to him.
Cleveland Utilities, was it in the same location at that time?
It was. They had just moved. You know, the location before I came to Cleveland, they were down where City Hall is. City Hall was at that time, the Cleveland Electric System building. And they moved to their new building out on Guthrie Drive, out behind, off 25th Street. And the old Cleveland Utilities building, or Cleveland Electric System building, became the City Hall. Well, actually, it was City Hall, and also the school system was there.
The school system.
The superintendent at that time, Dr. Yates' office, was there in that building.
Well, Cleveland's evolved a lot, hasn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, when I you may remember this, but you know, those early years there off of 25th Street at Cleveland Utilities, I-75 ended at exit 25. All the traffic came off the interstate, went down 25th Street, took a left, and went all the way to Charleston, crossed the bridge, past Bowater, and back onto the interstate. And it was that way for years.
Golly.
Can you imagine that today?
I couldn't imagine. And there probably was, was there as much traffic on the interstate?
No, the interstate didn't have near as much traffic, thank goodness.
Was that because people didn't have as many cars, or there wasn't as many people?
People just didn't go like they go today, I don't think. And, but yeah, all that traffic was routed down 25th Street. And of course, that was about the time that Hank Smith built McDonald's. Right there where every bit of that interstate traffic went right by his. Was
Hardee's there yet?
That's a good question.
Because I remember when they built Hardee's, and I would have had to have been 7,
I can't remember when that Hardee's, if it went up before McDonald's or after. I'm not sure. But yeah, and the traffic, it was amazing. We never thought the traffic was bad, even with all that interstate traffic coming right through the middle of town.
I guess, like you said, people just didn't go like they go now.
No, thank goodness they didn't. I'd hate to think about them doing that today. But yeah, it's changed a great deal. One of the things that attracted me to Cleveland was in being in the electrical business, industry, was that Cleveland had so much industry at that time, and still do. But I mean, compared, for a small town, the industrial base was huge, and
because we had Magic Chef.
We had all the stove companies. We had 3, Magic Chef, Brown, and Hardwick, and we had a lot of textile at that time. Yeah. We had Duplan, Elastic Yarns, Charleston Hosiery. We had the sock company downtown. Had a lot of textile, and we had a lot of furniture manufacturing. Jackson Manufacturing, Cleveland Chair, Collins, Cook Manufacturing, all furniture. So we had a lot of diversity, had a lot of industry and a lot of diversity.
I forgot about that sock factory.
Oh, yeah.
It
Where
was
the
on Peerless,
apartments are now.
Where the apartments are.
That was
I forgot all about that.
I can't remember the name of it. Yeah.
Sandra
But
Mill.
they made, I can't remember what the brands they made there were, but yeah, it was a sock factory. And
Everybody needs socks.
that's right, we do. But, and of course, from that time in the early 70s right up till now and continuing, we just kept adding industry. We lost industry, but we added industry.
And still adding.
Yeah, which is good. People got to have a place to work.
Wonder who or why Cleveland has been that way for so long. Do we attribute it to the Reimers back in the day, or the Hardwicks, or which they married, right?
Yeah.
I think they,
Well, it's good. That's a good question. Is how that.
or the end. Was it the interstate? Was it the railroad?
Well,
Depot maybe.
it was all of those. I think you.
And
you
the
could
river.
At that time, you can't say it as much today, but cheap energy, electricity was relatively inexpensive. Water, plenty of access to water. The interstate helped Cleveland for sure.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. We already had that industrial base, and I can remember sitting in a lot of industrial development meetings where industries would come in and they'd look at a map, and if they situated themselves in this area, they were, as far as distribution was concerned, it was a good location.
Aren't we like 9 hours from Chicago and 9 hours from Florida? We're about 9 hours from most places.
Yeah, I remember in those early days meeting people like from Michigan. People would tell me on their trips to Florida that Cleveland was kind of the halfway spot. Yeah. And they'd stop here and spend the night, eat, whatever. And I talked to a couple of people that wound up moving to Cleveland because, they stopped here to spend the night on their way to Florida, and they thought, they liked what they saw, and they came back.
I worked at the Chalet, which was thriving at the time.
Utilities. Very much.
And they called them halfbacks.
Yep.
But they'd stop on their way halfway back, I guess.
But we were the halfway point for a lot of travelers. We sure were.
Did you know a lot about sewer at the time, or was it more you're just administration?
Well, that's a good question. I knew nothing about. I studied electrical engineering in college, and after I started working at Cleveland Electric System at the time.
What was your first job there?
I was a distribution engineer. I worked on building lines and working with new industry, building, substations and whatever to take care of their electrical needs. But, one thing, I don't know if you've had any discussions about it here, but something that was pretty significant in the mid-'70s, the city commission at that time merged the electric and water system together. They were separated for years. We had a separate water system and a separate electric system.
Were they both under?
They both were under the city commission at that time. One of the commissioners was the commissioner of lights.
Yeah.
And so both were under the city at that time. And it was interesting how that all came about. In my mind, you may find some people that disagree with me on it, but in my mind, the driving force for merging the two utilities together was the passage of the Clean Water Act by the federal government in the early 70s. We had a lot of cities around the country, a lot of creeks and rivers being polluted by inadequate treatment, and it led to the passage of the Clean Water Act. And Cleveland, we all had to have studies done on our systems, and there were a lot of money spent trying to find out what condition these old sewer systems were in. And the cities realized very quickly they were going to have to spend millions of dollars to get in compliance. And I think the city commission felt like that it would be good to put that under a separate utility board that answered to the city commission, city council now. But with the amount of work, the amount of money that was going to have to be spent, the amount of meetings, I think that was a big driving force in what brought the two together. And in the I think it was the early 80s, the Cleveland Utilities Board was formed, and Gary Smith from American Uniform was the first chairman. I don't know if you remember that or not, but he was.
I remember him.
He was, he was
Lindsay's dad.
Yes, he was a brilliant person, and he was, to be the first chairman of the board, he was the perfect one.
So was he he wasn't necessarily into water and sewer, but he was just a good thinker?
Yeah, manager. I mean, he knew how to do things.
Is a good thinker the same as a good manager?
Yeah, I think they go.
Or not necessarily?
Well, I think they have to kind of go together. I do. But yeah, Gary was, he was the right person for the first job.
So prior to that, it was just sort of a separate division over each, a certain commissioner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, back then, under the old commission form of government, you had the commissioner of lights, you had the commissioner of police,
fire.
You had the fire commissioner, and you had the street commissioner. Yeah. And each one kind of ran their own little area, and of course they came together to do things in common.
I guess they were elected by the people, those commissioners.
Right. Yep.
And they didn't necessarily know anything about that area, but they had to appoint and hire managers.
That's right.
It seems like right now is the better way to do it when it's one, because it's just too big for that right now.
Yeah, you know, we changed, and I don't know the dates and the time, but, you know, we changed to the city manager form of government with the city council. And it seems like, if you look back, it was certainly the right thing to do, making that change. It was very controversial at the time.
I remember they had
very controversial.
Have a vote.
Yeah, there were votes and hearings and a lot that went into making that change to the new form of government. But for a city the size of Cleveland and where we're headed, I think if you look back, I think most people would agree it was a good move.
Maybe the other form of government was better back then.
Could have been, you're right.
And it just evolved to where it. Is there another form of government that we may get so big that even we outgrow this one?
I don't even know. I don't know what it would be. I know the only other form of government that I'm familiar with is where you don't, instead of a city manager, you have what's called a strong mayor, where basically the mayor is paid a salary of, you know.
The mayor is the city manager.
City manager. Yeah. That's right. Basically, that's what it is. I don't know of too many places that do that, but that is an option.
Boy, that is a whole nother thing in itself, what form of government to even be. I mean, you think how we're going to handle it. Well, first, which form of government are we?
Yeah.
But Cleveland Utilities is so big now. If you walked in today, would you be lost, or would you still sort of know how?
Well, I don't know too many people that are up there. Most of the people I worked with have retired. There's still a handful that I know and worked with and hired some of them. But It's I don't know that they have any larger numbers of people. Obviously, computers and mechanism, the trucks and the things they use to help get the work done has certainly allowed them to do more and more with the same number of people.
Maybe there's more regulations, or maybe were there a lot of regulations even when you were there?
Oh, yeah, well, the first big set of regulations came in the form of the Clean Water Act. That's what that was, just regulations about what you've got to do. And I would attribute, I don't know if you remember, I hear stories of young people that grew up in Cleveland and talked about how you go to Mouse Creek, down around the creek, and you couldn't play in it or be around it. It was so dirty and polluted and a lot of problems. And now we've got a greenway going through there, and you'll see people in there fishing and walking in the creek. And I attribute a lot of that to the Clean Water Act and all the work the city did to make sure these sewer pipes aren't leaking, that they're not overflowing. We've got better treatment. We created what was called a pre-treatment program for industry. In other words, industry had to get discharge permits for their wastewater, just like the city of Cleveland did. And they would discharge into the city of Cleveland, but we monitored them, tested their discharge. Basically, we just cleaned everything up.
Because you had to, because it'd be like those. I remember Larry Presswood would tell me that when he was a kid, he knew what color they were running at Hardwick Close, what color they were running that day, because that's the color the creek was.
Dye Creek.
Dye Creek, that's what they called
it. It would be red, and I saw it red and blue, and yeah, it would change colors. I don't think it happened over such a long period of time, but from where it is today, from where it was when I was there in the mid-70s, it's night and day. And that's you hear a lot of things about the EPA and they're this and that, and they cause us all grief, but they cleaned up the creek. They did. And the problem, you imagine all these cities polluting creeks like Mouse Creek or whatever's in their area, all that water flowing into the Hiwassee River, into the Tennessee River.
That's right.
Where we get our drinking water. It just couldn't keep going. So yeah, it was a good thing.
So you already had a treatment plant and everything before you.
Yeah, the treatment plant was. That's an interesting kind of history study. Is where that I think at one time the treatment plant was located on right around where Keith and 17th Street is. There was one there. Now, it wasn't there when I came to Cleveland.
I've heard that that's where it was.
There was one in that area. Then it was later relocated to Tinsley Park. Tinsley Park was the wastewater treatment plant.
After Kenneth Tinsley, who was at the time.
Well, the treatment plant was there, and then they abandoned that plant after several years of operation and moved it out on Mouse Creek Road. And when they left and all that property was there, that's when it turned into the park. The Tinsley Park was built on the site of the old city wastewater treatment plant. And the plant was relocated to Tinsley Park, where after several years of operation, that plant was located to the Hiwassee River, where it is today.
I see.
And that plant site turned into the soccer fields. That's where.
So they're not treating it there on Mouse Creek anymore.
No.
No. That's right. That used to be. I
That
remember
was the
it was
treatment
there,
plant,
but
right, for years. And we had to keep expanding the plant, and every time we would expand it, it just made sense to move it closer to the river.
Yeah.
And so we wound up at the river, which when you think about it, it opens up everything from the river south
Yeah.
to be able to be put onto sewer.
That's right.
As somebody in the construction
Yeah.
business,
Yeah.
that's important. That
You have to have sewer.
yeah, you can't you can't have dense development without sewer treatment.
You know, it's an interesting thing. I was watching, I went to my mom's for lunch, and I was watching that Smithsonian. They were going to some place in Mexico, and they were showing this village on top of a hill that had been abandoned. And I could tell there were porta toilets on top of that mountain.
Right.
And it dawned on me, those are for the tourists because that mountain did not have adequate sewer.
Right.
And they were saying it was abandoned and we don't know why. And I'm thinking, it's obvious why they didn't have any sewer.
Yeah, you got to have, I know we got into some issues about if sewer was available, you know, it was city regulation that you must, you know, connecting to the sewer was not an optional kind of choice if you owned a house.
Yeah.
If sewer was available, you connected. And I know we dealt with a lot of people that thought, oh, they're just trying to get money. They want your money. Well, obviously they need the money to pay for the system, but it really boils down to a public health issue. If you've got sewer coming to the top of the ground and you've got kids and people walking and playing around it, it's a health issue.
Sure.
And if it's available, you need to connect. And we have that here.
Now, that gets so interesting because I can see that, but now here's another, and I don't understand all of it, but say you're out, say you're 200 yards or 100 yards from sewer and you're in the county, you say, well, I'll run the sewer myself. Oh, no, you can't. You have to come into the city.
Right.
That gets complicated.
Yeah, it gets complicated.
I mean, why do you have to be in the city to
Well,
get
you
sewer?
there's some arguments that one of the reasons you need to be in the city, you need to be paying city taxes because the city has to back the bonds that are used to build the sewer system, and all that's got to be paid for.
And it's under the city.
Right. It's not a county. You could have a county sewer system. Hamilton County has a Hamilton County sewer system, and or you could have and I think someday we'll probably have that here in Bradley County. It's going to take a long time, but I think there's discussions about that now.
So if you're in the county and you want to hook on to sewer, city says you had to come inside the city. That's purely economics. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not anybody being mean. It's just.
Mm-hmm. These sewer systems are really expensive. There's no other way to put it. I mean, it's just.
Only imagine.
It's just. I remember when the city annexed, for example, we annexed several subdivisions that didn't have sewer. An example would be Mountain Brook was annexed. There are about 100 homes there in that subdivision. And I can recall, I think we spent just over $2 million to provide sewer to 100 homes.
And that includes everything from digging up the road to patching the roads to repaving the little driveway entrances that you have to.
But yeah. So what is that, $20,000 a house?
And I'd say that if you did that today, I'd say it'd be 10 million.
It'd be more, yeah.
Let me tell you about Capstar Bank. They're located in Nashville, Hendersonville, Gallatin, Athens, Madisonville, Sweetwater, Etowah, and in Cleveland at 950 25th Street and 3855 North Ocoee Street. I've used them. I like them. Give them a try. They're no problem.
Do you think they'll ever come up with something that's, I mean, to think in, say, 100 years, they may look at our society and say, all those houses were connected by a pipe that ran to one location, and they treated it. All they had to do was get this machine that did it.
Well, there's been a lot of work that's gone into that type of thing you're talking about. As a matter of fact, back in the 70s, I bought, 10 shares of some company that was working on that same product. I didn't make any money, but it was a company called Pure Cycle. And the concept was that you put a tank in a house, of say 5,000 gallon water tank, and you totally recycle the usage of the water.
Of your own water.
Of your own water. You just like you're saying, we look back, one of these days, we'll look back and say, gosh, they were connected with pipes and all this. What was that about?
And they had to go back and fix the pipes? That seems...
Yeah, and I think there are companies working on it now to where, the water needs, you're totally recycling that same water. Well, they do it in space.
They do it in space, yeah.
Yeah, when people, the technology to do it is known.
But to get somebody to drink their own recycled wastewater is not really going to happen.
Well, if water keeps becoming scarce,
I could almost see how they could deal with someone's home's personal waste, because they do that with RVs. Or maybe, or even the septic tank, same way, they just pump it out. But you can't bring the water in, and nobody wants to reuse their water.
No, nobody wants to.
So really, the water's the big hurdle.
Right.
But I'd say that there's 100 companies that think they. Remember when Elon Musk, was it Bill Gates that had that contest who could come up with a flushable commode that did not use water or something like that?
Yeah.
I don't know whatever happened with that.
Yeah, I don't either, but there's just a lot of work going on all the time to develop that system, because, as we go into the future with more and more people, fresh, clean drinking water is going to be at a I mean, I know a number we used to throw around at the water system. Of all the water in the world, there's only 3% of the water on Earth is drinkable.
What do they call that? Potable?
Potable water. And so only 3% of it is fresh. And 2% of that water, 2% of the 3 is locked up in ice, glaciers.
Golly.
So, of course,
at least 1%.
Yeah, so we're basically living on 1%, and that water, is totally recycled in the. I can't remember what where it rains, it evaporates, it just keeps. It's the same water.
Remember those? Well, they used to have those terrariums.
Yeah.
Where they were encapsulated and the water would condense.
It had its own weather.
Is that what they called it? Terrarium?
Yeah.
I think
could have been another name.
Yeah, I think it was. But I remember, you don't see those anymore, do you? Of course, the water from Cleveland Utilities that we drink, it's been recycled.
Yeah.
It's just it's coming back, so it doesn't bother us, and we know it's been tested. And Cleveland Utilities is rated one of the highest.
We had good water.
I mean, was that attributed to the system?
And the source.
Oh.
Most of the water at Cleveland Utilities in the city of Cleveland came from the Hiwassee River up above Charleston toward Polk County. And
how did they get it? Did they just...
It was pumped out of the river. We had a pipeline going all the way to the river, and a couple of 1,000 horsepower pumps, and they pump it right into the city,
and then they'd treat it and then send it out?
It's treated, and...
So the fact that the water was pretty clean made the treatment of it a little bit less...
Less needed, less chemicals needed for the treatment. The water had a good pH level. You've heard people talk about hard water and soft water.
Yeah,
There was no issues with that, where you had to treat it to make it. If water's too hard, you have to treat it to make it softer, or if it's too soft, you have to treat it and make it, just perfect.
I was at a motel this past weekend, and it's one of those where you wash your
Yeah,
hands
no
and it feels
soap.
like the soap won't come
No,
off.
so that's hard water.
Yeah. Is
Yeah.
the soap really off, or does it just feel like it's not? I never could figure that out.
It just won't soap up with the hard water.
Or it won't come off. Feels like it's still on there.
Yeah, that could be. And then the opposite of that is the soft water, where that's where you can't get it off, is when the water.
I think that's what I had, the
Yeah.
soft water.
Yeah,
What kind do you want? The
just
hard?
right.
Just,
Somewhere, and there's a way you can measure and test for it, and make sure it's where it needs to be. Now, a large amount of our water in Cleveland came from Waterville Springs. Gosh, I can't remember the numbers now. We got maybe 2 or 3 million gallons a day from down there at the spring. Where the old golf, the golf course was. That you remember the concrete?
that's why they call it Waterville Springs.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Spring. There's that end of the county has some really Blue Spring. That's where Blue Springs is.
Yeah.
There's a pretty good little aquifer down there in that part of the county, and the water that came out of there really didn't even need treating.
It was pretty clean.
It was disinfected, which you do,
Yeah.
but it was just as clean as it could be. I mean, it was perfect.
Some people they run water through a blue light now, and it changes. Is that do about
That's
as good?
good. Oh yeah, the ultraviolet light.
Yeah, I bet that was sort of new technology, right?
That was new, and it gets you away from chlorine. That's which we used for years, and nobody really liked the taste of chlorine. You could, if you had to put enough chlorine in the water so that when you put it in the system, it would stay effective for 2 or 3 days because when you put water in the water tank and it goes through the system, it may take a day and a half for it to be consumed. So you have to put enough chlorine in there so that as it decays, it'll still be effective. And that's why you'd wind up getting a chlorine test. If you take a glass of water that has chlorine in it and just set it out there on the table, the chlorine will dissipate. It'll just leave. But anyway, the ultraviolet's much better.
They still use some chlorine, right?
I'm not sure if they do or not. We were beginning to, I think that they were phasing away from that. The other problem with dealing with chlorine was it was just dangerous to deal with. I mean, handling it. Our plant operators had to switch chlorine tanks every day, and there was always a chance of a leak. And we did over a course of years. We had a couple of leaks that we have a lot of safety training to be able to repair them and take care of them and deal with them effectively. But the ultraviolet treatment does away with that risk of handling chlorine.
Well, that was some technology that may one day help to treat water after it's wastewater and stuff too.
You could have the ultraviolet treatment if you had the little package plant in your home, but
somebody will. You think 50
somebody
years,
will come up with that.
You think in 100 years it'll be all different?
Oh yeah. I think the one thing we can be sure of, if we're still around in 100 years, it'll be different.
And somebody will figure out something.
Yeah.
Did you ever lay awake at night thinking about all those? You were in charge of all those water lines, water meters, water leaks, fire hydrants, electric poles, street lights, traffic lights.
Yeah.
Golly, did it ever run you crazy?
Well, I left just before it did. I got out just before that happened. But I took my job seriously. I felt, making sure My dad told me, I told you my father was in the electric business just like I was. He said, the one thing people will ask you about the rates and they'll complain about this or they'll tell you this. But the one thing you got to be able to do is that when they flip the switch, the lights need to come on. He said that's the one way you'll be measured about if you're doing a good job.
Right.
And so yeah, we took it seriously. We had a lot of good people that had the same. They didn't want the lights to go out. And you talk about the water. It brings up the blizzard of '93. I think everybody remembers that. I think we just passed the anniversary.
I saw on Facebook like it was like the 14th or
March,
something.
But we had no water in the city of Cleveland.
Was it just froze?
No. What happened that night, that Friday night when it started snowing, we got 23 inches of snow, wet snow, heavy snow, and we had at least, I couldn't tell you the names of them, but we had 6 industries where their roofs collapsed.
I remember that. And Munford's collapsed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There were several buildings that collapsed, and there were several industries that had sections of their building collapse. And when they collapsed, they took out their sprinkler systems. So you can imagine all of them have sprinkler systems with 6 or 8 inch water pipes.
Right.
So all of a sudden we've got about 9 or 10 inch lines that are broken, draining the system. At the same time, there was no power at any of the pumps. And within about, took it on Saturday night, about 6 o'clock, we had 0 pressure in the water system. It was 0. There was no water that you could get out of the tap. And of course, my concern, I'm sitting there at the office and I was talking to David May, the fire chief at that time. Yeah. And he and I were talking on the phone and I told him, I said, David, you don't have any water to fight a fire. And we were really concerned about that night. By Sunday night, we began to get water pumping back into the system, and within 48 hours, we had it back.
I remember it was short-lived.
But for about 2 days, if we'd had a major fire, now they had water on the trucks and they had places, but if we'd had a major fire, it would have been a bad deal.
If I remember correctly, after it's that 48 hours, I think the sun came up and it really started to kind of warm up too.
Yeah.
It didn't stay cold.
No.
That helped.
No, well, it was March.
Yeah.
It was
like right now.
Who thought we'd ever get 23 inches of snow on March the 11th and 12th?
Did that worry you to death, or did you just say, hey, we just hang in here?
Yeah. Well, not much you could do. All you could do is just get it fixed. And we did. We had some big trucks. The state sent in some big trucks. Finally, we had to access our pumping station on the Hiawassee River. We couldn't get to it because of the snow. So we borrowed the boat that Bowater had. They get out there to drag logs out of the river. They took us up to the intake, and our guys got in there and got everything back ready to run. And we got Bowater to deliver us we couldn't get there by the road. It was on a real steep incline and it had 23 inches of snow and we just couldn't get to it.
Boy, that was a bad time, wasn't it?
Yeah, we were lucky in a lot of ways that it didn't create any more problems than it did. It was pretty bad.
Was there any other times when you remember specifically that really?
Oh yeah. Well, I was there long enough. I guess in 43 years, I experienced about every kind of weather event you could have, and going all the way. You don't hear many people talk about this one that happened in 1973. We had you were 6 or 7 years old. We had the biggest flood rain event that in my years in Cleveland we've ever had. It rained for over 3 weeks solid in March.
I think I
You might
remember. I
remember it.
remember where Big Lots is. That was just
Oh, yeah.
all flooded.
Well, the thing I remember, by George R. Stewart School, that whole,
Yeah, yeah.
that filled up and went over Keith Street.
God.
And I've never seen it do that since. But we had tremendous flooding. They called it the 500 years flood. So
Yeah.
I saw the 500 years flood. I saw the 500 years blizzard, I guess you'd call
I guess,
that.
yeah.
And then we had the 500-year tornado outbreak in
When was that?
2011.
Was that worse than when Dockery got blown away?
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah, that was in 74.
Yeah. So that was worse, you think?
That day, and I'd been at Cleveland Utilities, 3 years, and we had 2 tornadoes that day, that April. I think it was April the 3rd. And the one in 2011, we had 5 tornadoes.
And
in
did
one
more
day.
damage?
Oh, yeah, a lot, yeah. Yeah, the one in 74 was plenty bad, but, we just didn't have the number of tornadoes. We had 2 that were pretty bad. I think somebody got killed out on Benton Pike. It hit a trailer park out there, and somebody was killed, and a lot of damage all over. Down in Dockery.
Dockery, yeah.
They sent me, I was a distribution engineer at the time, and they sent me in a car with a radio in it out to East Cleveland. We were having trouble communicating, and so we needed a radio out there. The first storm had already hit Dockery, and late in the afternoon, maybe 4:30 or 5, the second one came through. And it came through, if you remember, right around just about where we're
About
sitting.
here, yeah, yeah.
Just about where we're sitting, right here.
Yeah.
It came through this north end and knocked down a couple of these TVA towers. And you remember where the old child shelter home was, the YMCA? It went right through there. And I sat on the steps of East Cleveland substation and watched that second. I was probably like a half a mile from it. And I could see that thing coming through there.
It seems like that's sort of a path,
Oh, yeah.
doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. We've,
I guess it's
We
just
had-
between the 2 ridges.
yeah, I was trying to think, these 5 we had, one of them took a similar path. But,
Around here, April is tornado season.
oh, yeah, that was April the 4th. And the other outbreak we had, wasn't it like April the 27th?
Something like that.
Yeah, 27th.
April's
or
the big
28th.
tornado.
Yeah, it is. Of course, I grew up, they told me when I came to Cleveland, I'll never forget this, we never have tornadoes in Cleveland. And I'm like, okay.
I guess in the big
that's
scheme of
good.
things, we don't have many, right?
We don't have too many, but I think they saved up when we got those 5 in one day. That's when we had to there were other times we got help to come in here and help us rebuild the system, but the tornadoes in 2011, I think we wound up with 60 or 70 men that came in we had several crews out of Florida that came up here and worked with us.
When did you retire?
I retired in 2013, October.
Not exactly, till almost 10 years
10
ago.
years, yeah, almost.
Seems like longer than that, doesn't it?
Well, it's gone by pretty fast, I tell you that.
Why did you retire?
Well, I was tired of working. I'd worked all my life, starting at 10 years old, and I was...
What'd you do at 10?
I mowed yards. My dad said, you need a job. I went to Western Auto and bought a $63.75 lawnmower.
What color was it? Red?
Red. They all were. and every Saturday I'd go to Western Auto and give them $2.75 till I got it paid for. And I mowed yards for 5 years with that lawnmower.
Did you have regular customers?
Yeah, I did. I had 5 regular customers, and then 2 or 3 that. So I was mowing close to 10 yards.
Do you ever notice with these yard mowers they'll rain for like 4 or 5 days wet, and then the day it's dry, everybody thinks they're supposed to run to their house. Yeah, right. and you got to realize they're catching everybody.
You got to catch up. You can't do them all at one time. That's right. But yeah, no, I retired in. I was 67 at the time, and it was time to retire.
If you had it do all over again, would you have quit it? Would you have retired at 63 or waited till you're 72?
That's a good question. I enjoyed my work. I enjoyed working, but yeah, I was ready to retire though.
Would you have done it earlier if you had to do again?
Probably not. Probably not. Maybe 65, a couple of years, but no. I enjoyed.
Not 55.
No, I don't think so. Nope.
How do you stay busy now?
Well, my wife and I, since I retired, all those years I worked, I never really went anywhere.
Yeah.
And I've spent the last 10 years doing a lot of traveling. I've traveled
way out or
all over. I've been to New Zealand. I've been to Germany. Oh, that's an interesting story. We met when Walker started their construction, I wound up renting a house to one of the engineers at Walker, and he wanted to rent it for 2 years, wound up renting it for 4 years, and we became good friends. And I wound up about 4 years ago going to Germany and spending 3 weeks over there. Not with him the whole time, but with their family. We stayed about a week and then traveled. But yeah, my wife and I are traveling.
Do you travel long stints or?
2 or 3 weeks at a time.
That's a long time.
Yeah, we'll be gone 2 or 3 weeks at a time. In the last 5 or 6 years, I've had a pretty strong commitment to my mom that was here, and I didn't want to be gone too long at any one time. I'd be gone maybe 2 weeks most.
Yeah,
that'd be the most I'd be gone. She was doing fine, did fine, but she passed away about a year ago, and so with that, instead of going somewhere for 2 weeks, I'll go 3 weeks. You know, I don't feel as much need to find my way back to Cleveland.
Did you bring her here to Cleveland?
She moved. My dad and mom moved to Cleveland in 2000. My dad had retired, and they just felt like a lot of their friends and Boaz had moved away or passed away, and they felt like it'd be good if we were close together, and they built a house here in Cleveland, and my dad passed away in 2008, and so Mom lived about over 10 years by herself. Did fine, did real good, but yeah, they made Cleveland their home, and they really love Cleveland. They lived in the same house for 50 years, and then moved to Cleveland.
I bet there was a lot of stuff in that house.
Yeah, that's another story. They had a lot of stuff.
You still have some of it?
Between my sister and I, we've still got.
Well, you just got one sister?
Yeah, one sister. I do.
What's she do?
She lives in Greenville, South Carolina.
Greenville, South Carolina.
She does. And
is that close to where that Murdaugh trial was, or was that?
No, that was over. The trial was over closer to Hilton Head, over in that area, Buford, and over in that area.
Hamilton. And
yeah, that's
I watched that.
I
got stuck watching that thing, and
Somebody got me going on that.
I couldn't stop. Could you?
I never really started paying any attention to it till about the last week.
I was about the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, I was the last week, and I'll have to admit, I got caught up in it.
Well, I did too. I watched it. I watched it too much.
Yeah, I did too. But
it was fun. I enjoyed it.
yeah, it was. It's interesting to see the legal process at work.
It is so.
Yeah, it's interesting.
In one way, it's discouraging, and in another way, it's not. I guess it depends on which side
you're on
when you're watching it.
That's for sure.
You know, we have a lot of moving parts in this country with the legal, education, all the government entities. It's a wonder we make it, but we do, don't we?
It's complicated, and I think as there's more and more of us. We're living closer and closer together. It's difficult.
In 1965, wonder how many people were in the United States versus now.
Well, now what is it now? 300 and
330 or something like that.
Yeah, 320 million, 320 million. Yeah.
Wonder how much it would have been. It would have been. You know, I went to Arizona here a couple of years ago, and it was so strange. Everything was spread out because even the tables in the restaurants were further apart than they are here. Even the airport, there was the
they got
chairs,
a lot of land.
They got a lot of land, a lot of space.
Yeah, they do.
But they don't have a lot of water. They got water issues.
Big time. They really do. And they got lots of people and not as much water.
On the courthouse square at 30 2nd Street is the law firm of Logan Thompson Law. Since 1965, they have served the legal needs for the good citizens of Cleveland-Bradley County. If you've got a problem, they're no problem. Give them a call.
Did you see that thing on the internet where that one guy had come up with a way to get water out of sand, I think it was? I guess that was
sand.
Somehow or another, you could put sand in this thing and it would extract. And I'm thinking there isn't any water in sand, so there'll be something.
It's H2O. You wonder how they put it together.
There'll be something, won't there?
I hope so.
Did they ever call you? Are you on any honorary boards or any consultations or anything?
Not now. I was on, during those years at Cleveland Utilities, I was involved in almost everything.
Yeah.
And not as much anymore. I spend time at the museum. I was on the museum board for a couple of terms, and I still like to go up there and participate. I'm a member of the Chamber of Commerce. I'm a member of Main Street, but not real active.
But on the utility board, you're nothing.
No.
You're done.
When I left Cleveland Utilities, I left it. I had my shot at it, and I did what I needed to do. And if somebody asks me what I think, I'll tell them, but I'm not trying to run anybody's business.
They don't ever call you and say, hey, what we do here?
No, I wouldn't expect them to. I really would.
If I was there, I'd want to have lunch with you once a week to tell you what's up. And,
Yeah, they've got a good group up there, and
let's see, who is it? Tim
Henderson's the manager, and Ken Webb was before him, and I was before Ken, and Joe Beavers was my boss. He was the manager there for 20 years, and and before him, the first manager was Wally Jacobs.
Was that the first water or sewer or electric guy?
He was the electric manager.
So prior to him, there was no water, no electricity?
There was electricity, and then you're getting into another era there, Wally Jacobs worked for the Tennessee Electric Power Company, who was a private power company before TVA.
Was that?
TEPCO.
Yeah, but who was it worked for them?
And the first when Cleveland Electric System was
Marvin Gill.
formed, he worked for Volunteer, didn't
Volunteer.
he?
I think he worked.
Yeah, he worked for Volunteer. And when TVA took over the TEPCO facilities, and then the cities formed municipal electric systems and the rural areas formed co-ops, Volunteer. You had this whole network across 7 states that served electricity, and it was TVA generating and transmitting electricity, and the municipalities and the co-ops distributing the electricity. And a lot of the original employees of Cleveland Electric System were ex-TEPCO employees. They had been working there, and I mean, it's like working for a bank and somebody else and you go to work for the other. Well, a lot of Mr. Jacobs had worked for TEPCO.
Was TEPCO a privately owned?
Privately owned.
Electric company.
Electric company.
Well, it took a lot of nerve to start your own electric company.
You're touching on some history there that I think when I retired, I got really interested in that part of the history. Mm-hmm. And what I found out was that Cleveland was really the center of electricity for most of Tennessee in the early 1900s.
Like 19 what?
Well, Ocoee Dam was built in 1911 and 12. And it's a very interesting story. The guy out of Chattanooga, Joe Con Gill, G-U-I-L-D, was an engineer. He worked for his father. His father built the incline and Hales Bar Dam, private dam that TVA later took over. And his son, after they built Hales Bar, about the time they were building Hales Bar Dam, they started the Ocoee River Project, which was the Ocoee Dam, the little coffer dam, and the flume line, and then a third dam that was supposed to be built later.
They were doing that under what? Under their own private?
Yeah, it was a private company.
Well, that was a big company.
Yeah. They had investors, that came down and put up the money, and this project. I mean, it was very ambitious.
Yeah.
It was, electricity was just beginning to show up on the scene, and they start this project, which I think is amazing. They built Ocoee Dam in 2 years. Can you imagine trying to build? Probably
you could get permitted now.
Probably
2 years.
20 years to get a permit.
Yeah.
But they built that dam in 2 years. They built the flume line in that project in about a year and a half.
I always thought that came from the WC.
It was this.
Mr. Gill.
It later became, and then it later formed the TEPCO Electric Company. There were other pieces of it, but all that power that was generated over in the Ocoee area came to Cleveland.
But so they had to actually build the flume, get the rights to the property, build the flume, build the dam.
They did it in 18 months.
Harness the electricity.
Build transmission lines, power lines.
Yeah, because
all over the country.
They, at that point, they didn't have a customer, I guess.
No, it was new. Everything was new, and but what made Cleveland, how Cleveland fit in the picture, is all the power was transmitted to Cleveland and there was a distribution substation over near where there was a switching yard over around where the old landfill used to be, off of Highway 64.
Hill Street, High Street?
Yeah. I think for years, the ruins of it were still up there, kind of covered with weeds.
So that was Mr. Guild's.
No, that was his project.
Right.
And then there was where the Cleveland Chair Company was there on 9th Street, where that substation is today, was the main electric distribution substation for East Tennessee.
God.
All the power came to that point, and then it was retransmitted by power line. It went from 9th Street, it went to Chattanooga, it went to Rome, Georgia, and it went to Knoxville, and it later went to Nashville.
So they didn't have any power till then?
Not hydropower.
Oh.
They had, a lot of the cities had some steam power. They had electricity, but they didn't have hydropower.
Did they distribute it?
Just in a little small area.
Oh. So hydro is one of the few that you can produce enough to
Well,
distribute.
it was the first big chunk of power, you might say, at that time. Of course, people really weren't looking to put electricity in their houses. Streetlights were beginning to come on the scene. They needed it for streetlights, and they needed it for streetcars.
Mm.
You know, the big cities had streetcars that ran off of electricity, and that was one of the
Steam
driving.
electricity at the
At the time, yeah, generated by steam, and TEPCO, what formed TEPCO was that they began to put the hydro project, the little steam plants together, and it formed the nucleus of TEPCO.
Oh. Because they had both then. They had the steam.
But if you've ever done any reading, you need to read about the Gill family in Chattanooga. Joe Con Gill. He died in like 1969. He was on the scene for a long time. He did all these engineering projects.
So that was sort of his brainchild, that the whole Ocoee Dam hydro. Was hydropower really new at that time?
It was new, yeah. It was, and they just started building, about the same time they built the Hell's Bar Dam, which was later abandoned. It leaked.
Isn't that where they claim that Tennessee, Alabama mark is, but they don't, they
where
can't.
They missurveyed
but
it.
they can't get to it because it's under the water or something like that.
Right, but that Hell's Bar.
Guild, Guild.
You need to read
There needs
about
to be a
it.
monument of that guy, doesn't there?
He was very, and his father, they were very innovative.
Were they from Chattanooga or from somewhere?
Chattanooga. And the history I read had, there were three of them. The Joe Congill III and Jr. and Joe Congill III is the one that did all this work up on the Ocoee, but his grandfather at one time had been the mayor of Nashville. I mean, it was a really interesting family. And his father was one of the first, I don't know if you'd call it an investor or founder or whatever, of Baylor School. Baylor School was founded, and his father was one of the founders. So they've got a big footprint in this area.
Yeah, and almost, you don't hear, I'd never heard that story.
I know, it's really, I had never heard it till I retired, and I spent a lot of time researching it.
You were actually working on the thing that Mr. Guild started.
Oh, yeah.
Through all those.
Yeah. A lot of these facilities that that TVA inherited were things that he had built in the 20s. And yeah.
So he had actually started building some of those buildings that we see up at Ocoee, I guess, right?
Well, at the dam for sure.
Yeah.
And now you had 3 phases of the project: the dam, the little small dam where the Whitewater people put in, and then the third powerhouse. The third powerhouse he didn't build. It was built during World War II by TVA. It was part of his project. It was, he had foreseen that part of it, but it just never got built.
Wonder if TVA bought him out.
Yeah, they bought him out. He didn't want to sell. It was a forced.
Was TVA at that point? It was a government thing, or
Well, it was coming out of the totally government. It was a government agency formed primarily, well, for a lot of things, primarily for flood control. Electricity was a byproduct
sure enough.
of the flood control. They had to build dams for flood control, but the idea was that we'll help pay for it with the sale of electricity.
And now the electricity's bigger than the
The flood control is still important.
Remember the movie Wild Water?
Yeah,
Wasn't that about
that
that
was all
era
about
when TVA
TVA was taking property to flood. Once they built these dams, they had to flood huge areas of land that people lived on.
They said if TVA hadn't have been around, places like the Hiwassee River would just be kind of a mushy swamp 2 feet deep.
Yeah,
it really controlled it.
Yeah, and TVA was born in controversy, and it continues to be controversial.
It really does today.
But a lot of things, they got, I guess one of the biggest things they were able to do was get electricity to the rural areas, and they did that.
Now, prior to that, it was oil lamps, I guess,
I guess.
candles.
Kerosene, probably. But it was, and they had in the cities they had gas. The street lights were
Gas lights.
Gas lights. They didn't put out a lot of light, but they were gas lights. You've heard the story. That's what prompted, I guess it was Edison, to get busy and develop electricity. Was
Him and
he was trying to overcome
him and another guy were trying to
get the
race
light bulb.
to get the light bulb.
Trying to build a light bulb so they
Trying
could
to find what to use for the filament.
Yeah, and do away with the gas lights at the time.
You heard the terms, "You're gaslighting me"? I'm not sure what that means.
Right. Well,
Now, if you were in the rural areas in 1905, you had no electricity. You probably didn't have electricity.
you didn't have electricity in the late 40s in a lot of places. I can remember when I was living in Fort Payne, Alabama. I was probably 5 years old, 4 or 5, because we moved when I was 6. My father worked for the Sand Mountain Co-op. And of course, if you know much about Fort Payne, it sits down in the valley between Lookout Mountain and Sand Mountain,
Right.
on both sides. He took me to a meeting one night. We went. I can remember it. I remember it very well. We went to a meeting at a schoolhouse up on Lookout Mountain where he was meeting with people that didn't have electricity, and they were beginning to develop plans to get electricity on top of Lookout Mountain down in that, and that was in the 50s.
Less than 100 years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah.
Way less.
Yeah, they had no electricity.
I remember going to my grandmother's house on Bates Pike, great-grandmother, and there was an outhouse.
Yeah.
She had an outhouse, and she had that thing on the sink where you just dip water out and drink out of the
well
ladle.
water.
She had a
Yeah,
pump.
right out of the well, probably. Yep. A lot of people had
People
that.
talk about the good old days. That couldn't have been that good. Think about it.
My dad told me the story. Back in those days, you'd drive through rural part of Alabama, Tennessee, wherever, and people had a washing machine sitting on the front porch. I don't know if you ever remember seeing
I remember
that.
seeing them. I think I've got some tenants that still do it.
Yeah, right. Well, the deal was back then you had to have some kind of electric appliance to get electricity, to get kind of in the front of the line, so they serve you with
You're kidding
electricity.
me.
So you had to have.
So that was a show. It wasn't necessarily a necessity.
And the thing about it, what my dad said, what would usually happen was that somebody would get a washing machine and they'd get hooked up with electricity. Then they'd give the washing machine to the neighbor so they could get electricity. And
well, I guess in those small houses there was nowhere to put it. It wasn't built for a
no,
washing
they weren't
machine.
built for, you know.
And why put it anywhere but on the porch? Maybe that's the only
and they
place
had
to put it.
discharge the water somewhere.
Yeah,
It usually
just
just
do it
went
off
out
the
on
porch.
the ground. Yeah. But the washer was usually out on the front porch.
And before that, it was those crank washboards, I guess.
The ringer.
Yeah.
But I guess the early users of electricity had light bulbs, a few light bulbs in the house, and then washing machine, and the big thing was a refrigerator. That was the appliance that people really wanted, was a refrigerator.
The washing machine was for show, but it was for the refrigerator. That was
where you could keep your food.
and a
from spoiling.
refrigerator pulls a lot of electricity too.
Yeah.
But before that, they would have ice deliveries.
Oh, yeah, ice box. Yeah. Your refrigerator. Of course, that was usually in the city. The people out in the rural areas, I mean, they knew how to. They lived without electricity, and even when they got it, I can remember in Boaz being at Marshall DeKalb Co-op. I'd go down and hang out down there on Saturday when my dad would be down there working on Saturday morning in the office. And their office was open. People would come in from the country on Saturday, come to the little town. And there was one guy came in. He came in and was talking to one of the ladies there, and he said, "My lights have been out for about 3 weeks." He'd just come into town for the week.
Yeah.
And he said, "If y'all ever have somebody out that way, I'd appreciate it if they could kind of check into it." And he didn't really care. I mean, he had electricity, but he didn't have to have it. And so I'm sure they sent somebody out there. But I mean, today, if somebody loses their electricity, it's the end of the world.
If the TV's cable's
if
a
they
little fuzzy,
blink.
I'm
We're all
going
that
crazy.
way. We're all that way.
What did they do with their spare time? Think about it.
Well, they worked. They didn't have
They
a lot of
just
spare
worked,
time.
didn't they?
Yeah, they worked.
Probably even.
They didn't have spare time.
And you know, you said you went down with your dad at the co-op on Saturday. Him working Saturdays was just a regular, normal.
They worked half a day on Saturday. The office would be open, you know, from 8 to 12, and it was important because most of the people, that's when they came into town. They worked all week, and Saturday they'd come in, buy groceries, and do whatever.
And then Saturday, your dad had to go home and do the stuff that he had to do at his house, probably.
Yeah, right. Well, of course, my dad knew how to sneak in around the golf too every now and then. He was a big
I always
golfer.
remember that opening scene not the opening scene, but the very first pilot of Beverly Hillbillies when he struck oil, and his cousin came in and said, "Jed, you struck oil." And he said, "Well, what am I going to do?" And he said, "Well, you can leave this place here where you have outdoor plumbing, no electricity, no water, nobody for miles around, or you could go to the city where you have lots of people, electricity and water." And he says, "I guess you're right. I guess I better stay here."
Oh, man, I know.
Now, if we think about that. Say, I always think about this stuff. I get really infatuated with thinking about this stuff. You know, you're talking about in the 50s,
Yeah,
mid
50s.
40s. Some people did not have water, electric, or power.
Right.
Now, that person's father did not have vehicles
Right.
in 1900. He didn't have a car. He had to get a horse and go out and.
Right.
Now, 100 years, we cannot think that we're at the end of this thing.
I know.
So what
I
is
don't
it
know.
going to be?
I don't know. Who would have ever thought we'd be walking around with computers in our hand, in our pocket that would
Well,
do
even
anything?
this episode here, I have people from out of the country watching this, and people
Oh, yeah.
in way out places,
Yeah.
and you would never think that that they could do that.
communicate like that.
But you think about it. What I don't know what it'll be, but I think it has to do. Probably the next phase is going to be more health, and looks, and hair transplants, and facelifts, and
We'll see. It'll be different. You can count on that. It always has been. And people in general have always struggled with change. Doesn't matter what it is, if it's change.
they boycotted just about every change from
We've
white,
been-
water to TVA is talking about.
Yeah. But I think the human race has a hard time dealing with change. And we're no different today than we've ever been.
Do you ever take your days off now that you're not working and just go up to the old Coy and walk?
Yeah, I do some of that. For exercise now, what little I can do, I ride a bike.
Well, that's what I
Yeah.
understand, and I do
Yeah.
also.
Yeah, I don't ride as fast as you do.
You ride up at
I'm on the Greenway.
okay.
I ride on the Greenway some, and occasionally I'll get out on the road, but usually on the Greenway.
You ride like a Greenway bike or
Right,
a road bike?
I've got two or three. I've got one that'll do well on the Greenway. I got an e-bike that I've used that helps me when the wind's blowing and it's.
That wind's brutal, isn't it?
It can be brutal, and
I rode yesterday and went 34 miles, and I rode
well, that's good.
20 miles an hour one way and 10 the way back because it just.
Wind.
There's
Yeah,
wind.
it'll knock you down.
Does the e-bike? How much assistance is there?
As much as you want or don't want, you can always just turn the assistance off and pedal it like a regular bike.
That'd be hard to do if
It's
you had
hard
it.
because it's heavy.
Can you just turn it on and just ride it like a slow motorcycle?
You could. You get into what you'll find out with e-bikes is there's three different classes of e-bike. Class 1 e-bike doesn't have a throttle. It's just assistance that you can turn on or turn off. Now, Class 2 has a throttle. No, doesn't have a throttle. The Class 2 e-bike's limited to 20 miles an hour. A Class 3 is limited to 28 miles an hour, and it has a throttle. So yeah, you could run it like a motorcycle.
20 miles an hour. If you fall off, it's going to hurt something.
I have found out that I thought when I first got into these that, I want one that go 28 miles. No, I want to go about
17, 18,
14, 15 max.
You listen to music while you're riding?
I listen to podcasts.
Do you have what do you listen to on your phone or?
Yeah, I've got a little ear thing that I'll put on there.
When somebody calls you, does it interrupt the thing? See, I couldn't do that.
I can take the phone call while I'm riding the bike. A little windy, but
Yeah, you can't hardly hear it, can you?
no. But yeah, who would ever thought you'd be out riding your bike, talking on the telephone?
I've found if it's windy, if you'll put something over your ears,
Yeah.
even though it's windy,
Yeah,
you don't feel like it is. It's subconsciously, it's almost eliminates some of it.
yeah.
There's not a better feeling than riding a bike.
Yeah,
is there?
bike's good. Matter of fact, when I retired, I got a bicycle.
From Scott's?
Yeah, I went up there and got a bike, and been riding it. I still got it. I took his bike. I converted it to an e-bike. You can buy a little kit and put on there, and I changed it to after I've had 2 knee replacements and some other leg issues that the e-bike helps me.
Does the knee I had a friend of mine got one about 2 weeks ago, and he still can't hardly walk. Was yours that? And some people will have it, and they're just over it like that.
I've had both of them for about 5 years, and
no problem.
Well, it's a lot better than it was. It's not perfect, but
can you still tell that you got a fake knee in there?
No, really can't. Somebody said, "Do your knees hurt?" And I said, "No, my knees don't hurt, but everything else does." But no, the knees don't hurt at all.
That's what Tylenol's for.
Yeah, that's right.
Ibuprofen.
That's right. That's right.
So are you looking forward to the future? Or are you going to just keep traveling and riding your e-bike, or is there?
Well, as long as I can. I enjoy doing that. Well, I've got some friends around town. We get together and swap stories.
Rufus?
Yeah, Rufus and Van Deacon. And,
oh, yeah, Judge Van Deacon.
Yeah, 2 or 3 people. Ken
You're
Webb.
friends with him, Judge Van Deacon?
Oh, yeah.
I like him.
Yeah.
He's very calm.
Yeah.
I went into a place of business here about a year ago, and I was in a bad mood. And I was standing there, and I was just getting ready to lose my cool. And it's a funny story. All of a sudden, I heard the guy behind me say, "Oh, Dee, just calm down now." And I turned around and it was Judge Van Deacon.
Was it Van Deacon?
That's the last time I saw him.
That's good. That's good.
I really appreciate your coming. This is one of the most interesting conversations I've had.
Well, it's good to see you again.
You see people that are successful, and you're not sure why, and then you meet them and you talk to them, you say, "Aha, I understand now."
Well, I appreciate you saying that. It was good to be here today and kind of reminisce on some of these things that have happened around Cleveland. It's been a lot going on, and there's more to come.
And we're going to stay positive.
That's right. I think that's the best thing you can do is just have a positive attitude.
I really appreciate you coming.
Yeah. Thank you very much.